This is video number 2 in a 3-part series covering an in-depth overview of the GreenFox baseball spreadsheet. These videos do go in order, so if you haven't already watched the first video, I would highly recommend you watch the first video and then watch the second one. To wrap up the score sheet part of this video series, I'm going to do a brief demo of the score sheet and show a few things, including what I've shown here with this navigator and various parts of the score sheet. So let's do that. Sorry. So here's my score sheet. I've got this set up for a custom league with 4 teams. And you can see I was already kind of playing this first inning for testing. So I'm going to start by using this reset button up here to clear the score sheet. I'll say reset all. And it basically wipes everything out of the score sheet from a game. And now I'm ready to load a new game. So I'll go up here to this game ID to click and load a new game. It automatically switches my sheet or my tab to the schedule sheet, and it tells me to select the game ID for the game that I want to play or load in the score sheet. You can see these are all games that I've already played. This game here I haven't played, so that's what I'm going to load between the Astros and the Mets. This tells me that I got an injured player from the 85 Astros, Bill Doran, and he'll be highlighted, but I can do what I want. So it loads the 85 Astros against the 73 Mets. Bill Doran is hurt, so I'm going to click on him and just I'm going to say yes, I want a replacement. Here's my subs. I'll put in Craig Reynolds. Okay. So now I've got my Astros here. I've got my Mets down here. You can see here, I'm going to click this button. I play by hiding all these pitching stats rows while I'm playing because I don't really need to see them. So I click this button. Here's my scoreboard. I'm going to click this floating scoreboard button to hide my scoreboard here and show it up here just to save more screen space. And now I'm ready to start my game. Here are the Astros visitors, and they're going up against George Stone, who started the starting pitcher. And I'm going to start by clicking in this square. I'm going to click on this help thing to kind of show this is what I talked about earlier, the score sheet batter block key, which tell which each of these squares, what they mean. I'm going to click in the middle. That brings up the batter result form. I can say Reynolds popped out to short. Pop out. Mark Bailey hits a single. Jose Cruz, it's a fielder's choice to second base. So you'll see here, Bailey is on first, it's green. He'll be now out at second, and Cruz will be on at first. So you can see here, I'm going to say, using this over here, this is my stealing second base cell here. If I click this once, it'll show that he stole second base. If I click that again, it'd mark him as caught stealing. One more time, he stole it, and that was a throwing error, so he's on third. I click it again, it's nothing. If I want to move him back, I'll just click here and move him back to first. But I'm going to say he steals second base, so I'll click that. Glenn Davis up. It's a home run. I click here. Home run. Okay. Fills these in as blue for runs that scored. Blue means they're earned runs. This 2, if we look over here, this is the RBI cell. So we got 2 RBIs. Kevin Bass, he strikes out. There's the OK and the OK toggle end of inning. So at the third out, I will click this because it's the end of the inning. So you see strikeout, and it puts this red annotation on the score sheet to mark that was the last batter of the inning. So that's the end of the top of the first. You can see I put 2 runs up here for the Astros. I'm going to click this thing to jump down to the Mets. Joe Niekro's pitching. go with strikeout. Walk. And if Rusty stops up, I'm going to say there's an error on, hits it to left, or let's say he hits it to right. There's a 2-base error on the right. That's a 1-base error on the right fielder. See now, E9, he's on first. Milner hits into a double play. Grom out, double play, second base. If I click OK here, it says, hey, it looks like there's 3 outs. Do you want to proceed? Yes. You can also see here, this with each batter, it tells you how many outs and where the runners are in green. And if you choose a result where one of these base runners gets out, this is how you choose that. Like on this double play, we could have said this guy at second base got out, but typically it defaults to whoever's on first, and you can always change it. So that puts double play to second base, puts Rusty Staub out at second, Milner on at first, and the end of inning. So that's the basics of how you keep score. I'll show a couple more things here, and then we'll move on. Okay, to wrap this up, fast forward to the 9th inning. The Astros are losing 4-3. Let's finish the game. George Stone pitched the first 8, but now I want to bring in a reliever for the Mets to pitch the 9th. So if I look at my helper over here, this top thing says change pitcher. So if I click this top bar here, this will bring up the Mets bullpen, basically all their other pitchers. And I will choose Tug McGraw to come in. This indicates he's a lefty because the way I have my league set up. Click OK. You can see here this bar means this is where the pitcher is changed. You can see up here is where it lists the pitchers in order. Terry Poole is up, but I'm going to play this last inning using the quick score feature. So if I change this help thing over here to the primary plus quick score button, you see here now it adds this second row or second layer of most of these buttons, not all, but most. So if McGraw strikes out Poole, instead of using the batter result form, if I look at this bottom row here, or I could just look at the quick score here. These are just the quick score features. Here's the strikeout. So if I click this cell here, which for the strikeout, you'll see it just marks strikeout. So without bringing up the form. So you can use either method, but all the results aren't in the quick score, but many of them are. And it also doesn't give you any position detail. So if Phil Garner grounds out, up here is the ground out. So if I click it once, it's ground out. You can see here it says ground out / line out. If I clicked it again, it would change it to a line out. Same thing here with the fly out, pop out. Dickathon will get a single, so that's first base is a single. And now Joe Niekro's up and he's not going to bat. So here's the change hitter, pinch hitter. So if I click on that little sliver here, this pops up the Astros bench. Bill Doran's in red because he's hurt, so he won't bat. But I will bat switch hitting Jerry Mumphrey. So you can see here it marks this purplish, pinkish, magenta color. That indicates where the pinch hitter occurred. Over here it writes in Jerry Mumphrey in the batting lineup. And I'm going to say Tug McGraw strikes him out to end the game. So I'll click the strikeout here. That's the end of the game. So I'll close this. When the game is over, I'll click the Do Stats button. This is my favorite part of the spreadsheet. It magically does all the stats. If it finds anything strange, it may tell you. Here it says the home team runs and RBIs don't match. That may be wrong, it may be right, but it tells you about it. And it says I've finished computing the game stats. But down here, if we look, here are 2 RBIs for these 2 runs in the third. In the 8th inning, the first run scored on this ground out. The second run scored on this 2-base error by the center fielder. And that's why this is unearned. That's why there's no 4th RBI. So that's okay. You can, and you see here, because Joe Niekro pitched the whole game, he had a game started. It was a quality start. He pitched a complete game, and he got the loss. But with the Mets, they had 2 pitchers, so it doesn't know who won or lost, so you have to decide that. So here, George Stone gets the win. So if you click in this column, where it lists these, you get this little box, and here I will say he got the win. So that adds a win to George Stone. And Tug McGraw got a save, so I'll click in his and give him a save. It already knows he finished the game. That's that. Quick look at these errors. The Astros made 2 errors by the right fielder and the center fielder in the first inning and the 8th inning. You'll see I have mine set to automatically assign them to the starters. So the right fielder was, let's see who was. Terry Poole. So let's assign these. We'll say, do you want to proceed? Basically, it's going to say, I'm going to put them to the starters. So by doing that, it assigns these errors to Terry Poole and Kevin Batts. So Bass was in center and Poole was in right. You can also configure these to happen automatically, but you don't have to. So anyway, that's how you would do the stats. Here are all the pitching stats, the hitting stats, and here are the team stats it shows right here. And then once you have that set, you just hit the save button, and it does a few Excel backflips and saves the data down in these stat sheets, which we'll talk about later. But then it'll also update the standings. Here, because I have playoffs, it'll ask me, do I want to update my playoffs, or I'll put P for the postseason. It updates my injury chart with Bill Doran. And it asks me if it says the stats were saved, and asks me if I want to save my spreadsheet. I'll click yes. And that's the end of saving your game. So that wraps up a little demo of the score sheet. So now let's talk about how to create a GreenFox league so you can use it to play your games. GreenFox allows 3 different types of leagues. Historical team seasons, for example, the 1984 Tigers historical league seasons, 1968, maybe 1974 American League, or in 2010, whatever, but it's basically all teams or in a given year. Or if it's pre-interleague play, you could just choose to play the American or National League for a given season. The third type is custom, and as written here, pretty much anything reasonable is possible. So on the GreenFox Facebook page, there are some special Excel data files that have data that I gleaned from the RetroSheet website along with the Sean Lehman baseball database. And that really gives you a jump start on creating a historical league. These files basically contain, everything from the Major League Baseball from 1901 to current about these seasons, and it doesn't include, you know, players' stats per se, but what it includes are, who the teams are, what I call a sub-league, which would be like the American or National League, which sub-league they're in, what division they're in, what's the name of the division, what players played for that team, what were the starting lineups for all the games, and what the schedule for all the teams in the season. And it also includes the historical or as played score of each game. So let's talk about how to create a historical league. So the first decision you need to decide on is, what kind of league do you want? Do you want a team or a league, or a league season, I should say? And depending on which one you want, but no matter which one you pick, I should say, you need to choose the right, I'll say, retro sheet helper data file from the GreenFox Facebook group in the files section. You can see here, they're kind of broken up by decade, but the older years, there are 2 decades contained in one file, like these older ones from the 19 aughts and 10s and 20s and 30s together, and 40s and 50s. But once Major League Baseball expanded with more teams, there was, in the 60s onward, there's just one file per decade. So you would want to download the appropriate file for the year or season you want to work with, whether it's you want to use the whole season or a given team, but you still need the right file. This is a snapshot of part of the league help sheet within GreenFox, and it's pretty much a step-by-step of how to create each type of league. And you can kind of see here the historical team and league seasons have a lot of their instructions are in common. And it also on this page are links to a video to how to create each type of league, and those are very helpful. There's also a link here of sending an email to the GreenFox support email, which I'm always happy to help you out. For the custom league, there are actually 2 videos. This one demonstrates one, because there are so many variables, or I shouldn't say variables, so many different types of custom leagues. It's impossible to make a video for each kind. But this up here is a link to a video that describes the various types of custom leagues in a little more detail. And this one goes through one example and creates a league. So let's talk here about just creating a historical league. How do you do it? Basically, you go to the league sheet, and this is a picture of the league sheet with some annotation on it to show you the steps you do in what order to create your league. And over here I wrote the steps, but basically where it says start here is where you start, and I call it the league mode, and that's what we already talked about. This one is choosing a historical team season, like the '84 Tigers. So you pick what kind of league you want, and then it'll prompt you and say, what year do you want? You put the year in here, and once you do that, assuming you already have the right GreenFox retro sheet helper data file, it has to be open. But then it will look in that file and read out and find all the teams and list the teams here. And because it's a historical year, it'll also provide an ID for each team, as well as what division that team is in. And after that, you can then click this purple button, and that will load all the data from the spreadsheet into from the helper spreadsheet into your current spreadsheet for whatever year you entered up here. And once you do that, you have to name your league and give your league a little ID that is pretty much always behind the scenes. And then you click this validate button, and that just really checks that everything is how it should be, creates your standings, and just pretty much wraps it all up. In historical leagues, it does provide the starting lineup for each game, but once you load that game into your score sheet, GreenFox allows you to modify that lineup, because a common occurrence will be that there will be games with starting lineups where you don't have all those players in your game to use. Maybe that player only played 2 games or something, but they started, so you'd have to play somebody else. So you have 2 options. This thing kind of shows there's this kind of cell here. If you click, you can edit the whole lineup kind of in its entirety and juggle it all around. Or if you just want to swap out one player, you can click on one player and make a substitute for that player, but that doesn't change your batting order. So really, if you want to make multiple adjustments to your batting lineup, it's easier maybe to do it using this button, or click this cell. Or if you just want to swap out a player, it's easier just to click on their name and you can swap them out. And you have to do that before you start your game. So now in a custom league, let's talk about that. This can have anywhere from 2 to 64 teams. You can have 1 or 2 sub-leagues, but that's the maximum. You can have up to 4 divisions in each of your sub-leagues. And you can have 2 to 16 teams in each division. And you can even have more than that. In one division per sub-league, you can have up to 32 teams. Your divisions don't have to have the same number of teams. And because it's a custom league, you as the user or creator are going to have to provide, a lot of the important information, such as what are the names of your teams, and you have to assign them each a unique ID. You have to assign the division that each team will be in if you have more than one division. And then you have to define the rosters, which include the player names, the IDs. The positions it's optional, but I would highly recommend it so that you can help make your lineups. You have to provide their primary role as a hitter or pitcher or both. If you have a league, you're going to have lefties and righties and have different lineups for lefties and righties, and you want to make sure you enter if they're a pitcher, if they're left or right, and if they bat left, right, or switch. And you'll also need to provide the league schedule, but as we'll see later, you don't have to have that all filled in at the beginning. Other info about custom leagues is that GreenFox does provide a data file to help you load historical team rosters with just a couple of clicks. And once you load the roster, you can easily modify it. And usually that means removing some players that you don't have. And here I mention again about the schedule, that you don't have to enter it all at the beginning, but you can create it as you go. You can add players to the league at any time. You can move players from one team to another at any time. But you can't add new teams. Once at the beginning of when you create a league in GreenFox, it asks you when you're ready to lock your league settings, which one of those settings is who the teams are, what their names are, their IDs. So once you lock a league, you can't add new teams to it. And here's a picture of that same league sheet. Now used to create a custom league, and you can see it. It looks quite similar as before, but it has a few other things that are different. You know, here is where you'd assign your sub leagues and your names of your divisions. For a custom league, you could also assign a name of a ballpark. For any league, you can actually assign these team colors, but we'll talk about that later. In a custom league, you may want to include the year of the team if you have different year teams playing in your league. And here's where you have to decide how many sub-leagues and how many divisions per sub-league, etc. And at any time while you're configuring any of these leagues, you can always basically switch the mode and start over. This shows a custom league that I made with 8 teams and 2 sub-leagues, the American and National. And it calls, I should go back here a second. It calls sub-leagues, there are 2 sub-leagues you can have at the most, and they're L and R. And that means from left and right, because when you look at the standings, the L one's on the left here, and the R is on the right. So that's all that means. But here's a picture of the standings. And here's where you load your rosters. And here's I'll say the helper button. If you have historical teams, this will save you a ton of work. And over here is a little info about these historical rosters. That the GreenFox helper data file for custom leagues, there's a file on the Facebook group, and it's GF something retro rosters. And this N is a number, and each year that number will go up. But it might be GF3 or 4 or 5, whatever it is. But it's GF something retro rosters. And it will contain all the rosters for all years for all teams. You don't need to find the right one for what a given year. But only one file is needed, and it has all rosters for all years. The reason it can have everything in there because it doesn't have to contain any schedule or lineup information. So here's a picture of kind of following with that same league I had before. If I had in my league, I had the 61 Baltimore Orioles as one of my teams. When I click this green button, this form pops up. As long as I had this retro rosters Excel sheet open in the background, and then it'll let me pick a year. When I pick a year, it'll list all the teams, and I could pick a team, and it'll show what team I've chosen here. And then once I have the right historical team chosen for my league team, I click this green button, and it'll load all those players into this roster sheet. So this kind of shows what it would look like after I loaded. Here are the Tigers, here's the Giants. But you can see when it loads it will load these player IDs, their name, their first, last, their lineup name in each of these categories. So it saves you a lot of work. In your league, the lineup name along with the player ID has to be unique for every player in your league. And this can be a little bit of a challenge if you have, a league where you might have Frank Robinson on 2 different teams. Maybe he's on your 56 Reds and your 63 Orioles. So you'd have to make some slight modifications to your player names and player IDs to make sure everyone's unique, but it's not that hard to do. But the convenient part of this is that it does load all this stuff in, like their role, what they bat, their positions if you care about that, etc. But you don't have to do it. If you want to type it in by hand, you can do that too. And once you load them, you can easily delete any of these players you want. There's this column here. If you double click in this column here, it'll prompt you and say, do you want to delete this player? yes or no. But there's no undo in this spreadsheet. So once you delete them, you'd have to manually put them back if you wanted to. There are some special custom league options on the game options sheet. And the most important one is whether you're going to use lefty righty lineups. This is option 10 here. And this is important that you turn this on or off depending on your league of how you're going to do it. Because if you're going to use this option, then you'll need to make sure that for each of your teams you create a default lineup versus lefties and a default lineup versus righties. You are allowed to change this during the season, but I would highly recommend that you don't. But it's up to you. But typically that's probably something you want to know, have figured out at the beginning of your season. Here is a slide showing two different, well, this for here is the lineup sheet itself. So you can see here it'll list all your teams in your league, and then you're allowed to have 4 different lineups. But typically you'd only mainly use 2. That's if you're using a lefty and a righty. If you're not going to use lefty righty, you would just use this default, which is the versus lefty. But typically it can kind of collapse most of the rows in this sheet, so you're only looking at one team at a time. And that's what this expand and collapse are for up here. But in this example, for the 64 Phillies, if I click this versus lefty cell here, it would pop up this lineup editor form, and this is what allows me to create my lineup. And you can see here, it would list all the players on the roster, other than the pitchers, on the left in this list, and I would use these buttons to choose the players I want in the lineup, and I could use these, move up and down to adjust them to get them in the right order, and you can use this position picker section over here to assign your positions. And there is a generic pitcher slot if you're going to have your pitchers bat. So that's how your lineups work. There are some other buttons here that once you create one lineup, if you made your lefty lineup and your righty lineup is quite similar, you can copy it from the other one. Like here, this is the versus righty lineup. I could copy my versus lefty and maybe get a head start on my lineup. But that's how you create your default lineups for your teams. Here is a picture of the schedule sheet. And you can see here, there's a lot of buttons here, but don't let this scare you. And the schedule sheet's the same whether you have a historical league or a custom league, but in a historic league, it fills all the stuff in for you, so you don't have to do anything. But in a custom league, you have to fill in the schedule. And you can see here by this note up here that the yellow cells in the header indicate the required fields. And the green ones, I'll say are optional or have a default value or will automatically be filled in for you. So for sure you need to fill in the season game number, and this is important because for one, it has to be unique and it has to be a number, and this is how the spreadsheet knows the order of the games, and that's important. Mainly what it's used for is both for injuries, if you want to use it to track your injuries, but also to track hitting streaks, so it knows what order the games are in. The next required field is this game ID, which needs to be unique for every game, and I show a format here, but it can be as simple as the same as your season game number. Your game ID can just be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. That's all you have to have. Or you may want to make it a little more detailed so that by looking at a game ID, you'd know a little bit more about who played it if you want to. That's up to you. But it has to be unique. Then you have the visitor team ID. I'm going to skip the starter here. And then the home team ID. Those are the most critical to know who's playing. Then you'll need to figure out who the starters are for each pitcher. You can fill these in manual, or there's also a little tool to help you fill these in. You can also see here, this is an example of, in this league I had Jim Bunning, who was on the Tigers and the Phillies, so I had to kind of change his name here so I would, when I looked at it, I could tell, oh, this is the Detroit Tiger Bunning, and this is the Philly Bunning. That's just an example of how to change the names to make them unique. And they said these green columns, once you fill your part in, the spreadsheet will attempt to fill in the rest. And you do it by, over here, these two buttons. You first have to unlock it. That's when you can enter or make some changes. And then when you're done, you have to lock it. And before it's locked, the code behind the scenes will make sure that what you have in there is legit. Like, you can't put in a game with team IDs that aren't in your league, or starters that aren't on your teams. So that's what it'll do. And it'll automatically figure out what game number it is for the team, both for home and away. And it'll fill in this team name also based on the ID. And if you had your ballpark filled in on your league page, it'll fill in this ballpark. This game type by default is a regular season game, or a regular season game and a single game. If you could also denote if it's part of a doubleheader here. So that's, and again, the most important thing I will say is you don't have to figure it out all ahead of time. You can just do one series at a time and go as slow as you want, and figure it out as you go. So this yellow is just mentioning the required fields and the other ones. And you can see here, when you lock it, it'll always update this table here where it shows how many games you have scheduled, how many you've completed, and this is how many played. We'll talk about that in a second. So this button here, so here we're looking at the same thing here, this little table of scheduled, completed, and played. So the obvious question is, what's the difference between completed games and played games? And the difference is, if you look over here in the score column, is that scores, if they have a leading asterisk, are score-only games that count in the standings but have no stats. And I added that functionality so you could, if you wanted to just play one team or play some games for a team, but kind of have your standings reflect the entire league. So you could put in, I'll say, either quick play results for other games or use these historical results over here. So you can click in here and say, use the historical result for this game, and then it'll automatically copy it over here. So that's what this asterisk means, is it's a score-only game. There's no stats, but it's in the standings. And that's what's different here. So any game with a score is considered completed, but only games that don't have the asterisk are considered played, like played with stats. That's the difference there. So here's an example of a historical league season from the 1974 National League. You can see here, the green team is the winner, the red team is the loser. Here's showing a double header. You can see this game type is 1 and 2. You can see that here's a double header. This slide here is demonstrating this feature here called the Starting Pitcher Assignment Table, or SPAT. And this is a tool that I created to help you assign starting pitchers, kind of like dealing with your pitching rotation. So you could choose a team and it will just show their team or that team's games, and you can see what games have been played. They're in green. These white games on the bottom haven't been played yet. And it gives you the list of their pitchers that you can easily click on and then click where you want them to pitch. So this is a helper tool to help assign starting pitchers that doesn't require you to type anybody's name. So you never misspell anybody's name and have it tell you that it's invalid. So that's the starting pitcher assignment tool. Here's one other thing about the league is the league injury chart, which is an optional feature that obviously that means you don't have to use it. But if you do, it's a convenient way to keep track of players that are hurt for however many games that they're hurt. So you don't have to remember, write it down someplace else. And it's kind of tied into the score sheet because in the batter result form, there is something to add an injury if it happens during an at bat. So you can see here, once you choose that, if you click on this, it'll prompt you and say, hey, do you want to add this person to the injury chart? And you could. So this is showing what the injury chart looks like. If the rows are in gray, that means they're not active injuries. They've players that were hurt, but they're no longer hurt because the games that they were out for have elapsed. And the ones in purple are active injuries. And then here in the lower right, this is saying when you load a game in the score sheet, as we kind of showed in the demo, that it'll give you a warning message telling you that there are players in this game that are currently on the injury chart, and they'll be highlighted on the score sheet as well as in the substitution window. But you don't have to abide by that. You can do what you want. It doesn't stop you from playing them, but it's just giving you that warning. So that's the end of this section of info all about GreenFox leagues, historical team leagues, historical league seasons, and as well as a lot about custom leagues within GreenFox. One more thing I want to mention about custom league rosters, or maybe it's actually two more things. But here I want to mention that custom league rosters, if you have teams that aren't composed of purely historical teams, then you have a couple options. So one is you may be able to use this copy paste play one player at a time mode if they're historical players. And this would be possible if you have all-star teams or draft league teams, whether just from a single year, like you had a custom draft from all the players in 1988, or you drafted players that were composed of any team from the 70s that you could choose. So those are examples of you have teams made up of historical players, but they're not on their standard teams. And the other option for custom league rosters, if you have fictional players or players that aren't weren't on a major league team, then in that case, if you have those types of players, the only option really is to enter them all manually. And maybe you have them in a spreadsheet already that you could copy and paste some of it in. But for the most part, you have to enter those manually. But for the historical players, maybe copy paste one at a time, I wanted to show this feature, which is if you use the historical roster helper file, from the retro sheet helper file from the Facebook group, it has a way to copy players with their associated data into your custom rosters sheet, one player at a time. So I kind of showed here in the order. So first, in the historical rosters retro sheet, you'd first click this copy player mode and it would turn this on. The second thing you do in your GreenFox sheet where you're creating your league, you'd click this toggle paste player mode and it would turn this to on. The next thing, once those are both turned on and you have your rosters unlocked, as it shows here, you can then click on a player over in the historical rosters sheet, and then it'll highlight, kind of like it shows here for Mickey Cochran. It'll highlight their player ID, their first name, their last name, their lineup name, their role, what they bat, what they throw, uh, their teams, if it doesn't really matter, but their position list. And if they're a pitcher, what their pitcher role is. But it'll copy all those cells. And then over here, you just click in the next blank lineup name and it'll paste it all in. So I did it here I was pretending I was making a custom league team for an all-time great Detroit Tigers team. So here I pasted Ty Cobb, Hank Greenberg, and I was going to paste in Mickey Cochran in here. So that's a way to populate your rosters without having to type it manually. It takes a little bit of work, because over here in the historical rosters spreadsheet, you can use these filters up here to kind of make it easier to find the player you want. So you could, here I chose, okay, just show me 1935 Tigers, and then I could easily find, Hank Greenberg and Mickey Cochran, or Charlie Gehringer, whoever I wanted to choose here. But this is a convenient way to copy players, because it also gives you the IDs and these other things that may be helpful to you. But again, it's optional. It's an optional method of populating custom team rosters if they're made up of historical players.